Hello, welcome to Pluralsight's IT Ops News and Talk. I'm Don Jones, Curriculum Director for IT Ops Content, and this is our show for April 2016. Let's start with a quick recap of some of the more interesting news from the world of IT. Joining me this month is Pluralsight author Tim Warner, who's providing our news update. Take it away, Tim.
As you know, Apple and the U.S.'s Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, have been at loggerheads the past several weeks. The San Bernardino shooter, Syed Farook, had a PIN-protected Apple iPhone 5C. In other words, evidently, Mr. Farook had set the preferences of the iPhone such that if you didn't enter the correct personal identification number X number of times, it would wipe the device. So clearly the FBI wanted to get access to the phone to gain any necessary or present intelligence. And Apple was in a tough position and is in a tough position because their cloud services are based on trust with their customers. So up till very recently, they were at a standoff. The latest news concerning the situation is that the FBI reportedly paid professional hackers a one-time fee for an exploit. So I guess that the FBI now presumably has full access to Mr. Farook's phone. To be perfectly candid with you, I myself wonder, how do you know whether an iPhone is configured with that auto wipe feature? I've been an iPhone user for several years, and just picking up a phone, I can see that it's protected with a PIN, but I don't know for sure how the preferences under the hood are set. Wouldn't it be something if the FBI paid this hacker group an enormous sum of money, and the hacker group determined that there was not a timeout or a limit after which an auto wipe occurred? I don't know. But what we do know is that FBI Director James Comey said that the exploit works only on a narrow slice of iPhones, specifically 5C and earlier models. In the Apple iPhone 5S and later, the encryption engine has been moved into hardware, so it evidently is much more robust and not reachable by this exploit. It's also unclear as of this moment whether the FBI will share the exploit with Apple so that they can fix it on their end. Now, I certainly, being an outsider, can understand both points of view. Apple is a for-profit business, and like I said, any kind of cloud service is going to involve trust with customers. I'm going to reduce my trust with Apple if I see that they can create a master unlock that can presumably unlock anybody's phone. The FBI, on the other hand, is looking to gain as much intelligence concerning terrorists as possible, and so they feel that businesses should play along with them in the name of national and international security. In conclusion, it appears that we have an underground business market in selling exploits for zero-day vulnerabilities. We can call it a cyber black market if we want. Facebook chatbots. At the recent F8 Developer Conference, that's Facebook's own technology conference for programmers, Facebook announced their chatbot application programming interfaces. Now, what does this mean? This feature is called Bots on Messenger, and it extends their own Messenger application. Facebook Messenger is a mobile application that allows Facebook users to, chat with each other outside of the Facebook.com website. Remember that Facebook purchased WhatsApp, which is the #1 messaging application, so Facebook wields a pretty big hammer in this space anyway. The bots refer to computer programs that simulate humans. Think on your smartphone, you may have Cortana on a Windows phone or a Windows desktop computer. We have Siri in the Apple world, Google in the Android world. The chatbot is the next generation of that, where people can interact with businesses in a personalized way at scale, all by using plugins or extensions to the Messenger application. For instance, you may be shopping for a present for your 6-year-old daughter. You could just send Target, let's say, their bot, user-friendly questions, and you'll almost feel, presumably, like you're communicating with a live human being. This makes sense for big businesses because they don't have to pay live human beings to fetch this information for customers. The APIs mean that Facebook is inviting developers from around the world to get on board with building these automated bots, which in turn will be consumed by businesses of all size all around the world. Now, of course, any newly announced technology is going to have growing pains. As of this recording, in April 2016, the Facebook chat box don't yet support credit card payments through the app, and of course, there always will be, at least according to what Facebook said at F8, an option to go to a live chat for people who aren't comfortable communicating with a computer. Finally, we have Powerware malware. This buzzword refers to ransomware written in the Windows PowerShell scripting automation language. Ransomware is malicious software that will encrypt user data on your computer so you can't get to it. And in order to get the unlock key, you have to pay the developers or the users of the malware a one-time fee. It's criminal activity, no question about it. And what's novel for some is that it's using, in part, Windows PowerShell, which is ubiquitous in the Windows platform, both for Windows desktop and Windows server computers. The way that this Powerware malware works, it's vectored through a Microsoft Word macro. Now, fortunately, recent versions, since at least 2007 of Microsoft Office, disable macros by default. So as long as you have those settings and you're educating your users to be careful about allowing macros to run, that should circumvent the problem. But anyway, if the macro does in fact run by the user opening up the document and allowing it to happen, the malware will spawn a hidden cmd.exe window, which starts an unrestricted PowerShell session, which downloads and runs a script from the internet that encrypts most of your user data. And again, you have to pay several hundred to maybe thousands, depending upon who did it, to get the unlock key and get access to your computer. It's not a joke. That said, this shouldn't be surprising. Malware has historically been about people trying to make money in one way or the other. The fact that we're using macros dates back to the earliest days of malware. The fact that we're using PowerShell, and it's not a surprise because people who write malicious software look for the largest common denominator. And as I said, any Windows system is going to have PowerShell installed. It's actually pretty darn difficult to uninstall PowerShell, if not nearly impossible nowadays. So this underscores the basic bread and butter security principles of proper user education, restricting macro use with productivity applications, and PowerShell itself has several built-in fail-safes that allow you, for instance, to force a particular script execution policy on a system.
Thanks, Tim. Next up is Pluralsight author Dale Meredith. As a co-author of our immensely popular series on ethical hacking, Dale seemed like a perfect pick to provide you a little security update for you this month. Dale, it's all yours.
Thanks, Don. You know, I don't think a day has gone by this year without hearing something about some form of ransomware hitting a company. And you can imagine what's happening to the end users. I recently had a student all of a sudden get up and leave the class and rush back to his office because someone had clicked on something they shouldn't have, which resulted in 2 terabytes of data being encrypted. Some of you may have had to deal with the epidemic, or worse, pay off the attacker, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Ransomware really isn't a new thing. Back in 2013, the FBI stated that ransomware attackers were paid over $27 million in just 2 months. Thank you, CryptoLocker. So what did the attackers realize? Well, first, trying to get personal data isn't as profitable anymore. And 2, this is really easy money. Last month, Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital in Los Angeles paid a ransom of $17,000 to gain access to their systems. Also last month, an attack at MedStar Health forced the largest healthcare provider in D.C. to shut down much of its computer network. Can you even imagine that? Patient records, doctor's notes, medical histories, all gone, unless you pay off the dirtbags. Oh, excuse me, let me put that in a more politically correct description. Individuals that prey on others. Now, the Baltimore Sun reported a ransom of $18,500 was sought, but MedStar declined to comment if they paid or not. So the question usually comes up of why this influx in ransomware? Well, to be honest, stealing data is far more labor-intensive, requires the attackers to keep their presence inside of a victim's infrastructure without being detected for months as they try to steal the data. Then they have to go through the process of trying to find a buyer. As opposed to ransomware, the attacker thinks, I'm going to get paid immediately, and all I did was encrypt data. Now, the biggest issues is actually twofold. One is that technology is moving at such a fast pace. And quite frankly, consumers don't care about how things work. They just want it to, and I'm using air quotes here, work. And they also want a new and shiny object that has appeared. That's, quite frankly, irresponsible and foolish. The second is manufacturers are looking to offer more and more features without truly checking the security of those features. Let me give you an example. CES, or the Consumer Electronics Show 2016, Samsung showed off in Vegas the new refrigerator that has a 21-inch flat screen tablet in it. And it's designed with all kinds of features. The ability to look inside the fridge via remote cameras mounted on the inside. Create a shopping list. And automatically order foods as they run low or at a push of a button. Write a message to your family. Download display messages. Watch streaming TV. Listen to music. And view photos. All of which is really cool. However, is Samsung or consumers considering that this is a possible target on your home network? Trust me, if I'm thinking about this, black hats are thinking about it too. It's just another way or another vulnerability. Now, with the Internet of Things, this issue is going to become more widespread just because of the number of targets we're creating for black hats. I can't personally wait for the first ransomware to encrypt someone's car. Yeah, think about that one for a moment. If you want to unlock your doors or start your car, pay me $5,000, or you'll never drive the car again. Brings a whole new meaning to the phrase carjacking, huh? There are already ransomware attacks hitting mobile devices. Oh, don't think I left you Apple folks out. KeyRanger, which was recently found in some distributions of Transmission. It's a BitTorrent client. Okay, time out here, folks. Let's call this program what it really is. It's a software program for stealing the work of hardworking folks because one's too cheap, or has bought into this notion that you should get something for free because I'm special. Frankly, if you get a piece of malware because you're pirating content, I'm happy for you. It couldn't have happened to a nicer person. Now, I get it. You might get this type of ransomware because your friend or coworker was infected, and it is passing on without your knowledge. So let's review the Superdale rules for protection. 1. Stop clicking attachments or links that are unexpected or have bizarre-looking URLs. 2. Update everything, not just your PC, your OS, your BIOS, but your routers. And if you've got some Internet of Things in your home, check on updating those as well. But more importantly, back it up. In fact, that's the only way that ransomware would ever go away, is that you don't pay the ransom, but instead you just restore your data. Okay, I'm done ranting. I'm going to turn the time back over to Don while I go do some meditation and try to calm down. Don?
Our guest this month is Pluralsight author Greg Shields, who, amongst his many other topics, is one of our top authors for the VMware product line. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I kind of wanted to start at a high level. You know, it's been kind of a rock'em sock'em few months for VMware. Their majority stakeholder, EMC, is being acquired by Dell. They've laid off pretty much the entire Workstation and Fusion teams and a good chunk of their vCloud Air team. And they're kind of in a marketplace now where they're getting attacked from the side by all the shift to containers, or at least the adoption of containers, if not shift, which is a market that they really don't have a story for. So if somebody's working in a shop that's a big VMware shop, are these things that they should be paying attention to?
Well, you know, there are rumors indeed also that there's a bit of a brain drain going on in the organization as well. Some of the senior leadership too. We've seen some shuffling over there in terms of senior leadership. But I don't think necessarily that what you referred to as this shift to containers is necessarily an immediate threat there as it relates to a VMware. I think what we're seeing more an example of is an organization that's kind of hit the top end of a maturity cycle for a particular approach in delivering applications. You know, virtualization's been around for a really long time at this point. And so when you see things like, the Workstation team and the Fusion team have been essentially laid off, you could look at that in a couple of different directions. One also direction to look at is the fact that there really has not been much additional change to a VMware workstation in a pretty long period of time. They've kind of ironed out a lot of at least at this phase of the game, a lot of the issues for the people that are making use of it in the way that they are. I wouldn't think necessarily that the IT pros out in the world today need to take a look at their virtualization environment and then take a look at containers and see one as directly replacing the other in any kind of near-term future. But as it relates to VMware itself, I think the real deal there has everything to do with just the fact that we're talking about a technology here that is seeing some competition, not just from containers, but also from some of the other people that are out there. in many ways too, you think about kind of the internal politics that goes on with an organization whenever you have any kind of buyouts. I mean, many of us here listening today have had to go through situations where you end up with new leadership in an organization. And so some people may internally be reading this change as something that they're just not interested in continuing with. So it's kind of, I think, a little too early yet to kind of read it too much into what we're seeing here, because what we are seeing is a very big, very complex, and kind of challenging connection or merging of these two companies as they're going through this buyout.
So, kind of digging down more to the technology level, then, what are some of the exciting things going on in the VMware world? I mean, obviously the vSphere 6 stuff has been out for a yearish plus maybe right now, and probably most people are right to the point where their companies are sinking their teeth into that and they're getting that deployed. Anything there that you kind of find exciting and interesting?
Yeah, they're doing some really cool stuff these days with, it's funny because we talk about how adding the word virtualization to anything has been kind of the marketer's dream in the last generation. We keep seeing the word virtualization added to networking and to storage and whatnot. But there's a couple of really key areas that I think are worth people's attention, not just because VMware is focusing on them, but because really the industry is focusing on them as an alternative approach. And in the case of VMware, it's this whole hyper-convergence shift that you're seeing that, in all honesty, has really made a lot of sense. If you kind of just think about the problems we've been dealing with in the past, the idea of connecting these servers up to consolidated remote storage kind of automatically adds a lot of complexities while attempting to remove some other complexities. And so what VMware is doing, and even what Microsoft is doing with the next release of Windows Server, and even other tools that are out there, with this whole move towards bringing the storage away from the remote SAN and back to the individual single server, but keeping them configured in such a way that you don't necessarily have to think of that server or that storage as being specifically local, but more of a distributed local. That whole hyperconvergence move that you're seeing really is kind of, at least for me, one of the niftiest things that we're seeing in terms of technology that has gone from being something that's kind of cool, but still way off in the wings, to being something that you might really consider doing in an environment today.
Now, one of the things that's kind of happened to not just VMware, but virtualization in general over the past few years is, everybody kind of had a big marketing rush toward virtual desktop infrastructure and then kind of stopped and said, yeah, maybe this doesn't make sense the way the marketing people said it does. And so there's a lot of organizations that are doing VDI in some fashion for certain projects and certain use cases, but very few who just switched to that as their only client delivery mechanism. What's the picture in the VMware world today? I mean, I know a lot of folks looked at VDI originally, made their decision, and if it was a decision that this wasn't going to be the one true thing, then we weren't going to look at it. But there's been a lot of shift. I mean, even VMware kind of refers to that space as desktop and mobility now, kind of implying they've moved a little bit beyond that original desktop viewpoint.
Yeah, I think one of the issues originally with the VDI, back in the earliest days of VDI, it was always that the answer is VDI and VDI is the answer. And when you think of VDI, you think of that sort of shared model where a user goes in to access some desktop that when the user logs off, the desktop refreshes and makes itself available for the next user. That consolidation, that pooled model for VDI can be very useful in a lot of different configurations. I mean, if you've got a fairly static application set, if you've got users that perform relatively routine tasks against that application set, then the pooled model can work for a lot of users. The reality is that there is those occasional onesie-twosies, not even really the occasional onesie-twosies. There are the onesie-twosie applications that are sometimes the norm for different organizations. And when you start moving into a pooled model, a shared model VDI world, and you still have those occasional onesie-twosie applications, those apps kind of break the whole reasons why the model exists. And so a lot of the hemming and the hawing, a lot of the vacillating you're seeing right now in terms of technologies out there in the desktop virtualization space are different approaches that are being laid into place in order to provide some of the benefits of VDI, but also to provide it in a way that facilitates all these other applications that might not necessarily be on your base desktop image.
So it really has kind of shifted then more toward application delivery and not just desktop delivery.
Well, Don, you and I have been, for years, we've been sort of laughing about the idea that the VDI, the whole movement of VDI, it has the word desktop right in right in the middle of the acronym there. But the issue is that at face value, the users themselves could care less about the desktop. It's the applications that are of what's most important to them. And so what, at least to me these days, I think what we're seeing is a right sizing or maybe a rationalization of what was formerly a focus on the desktop, on the operating system, more towards the application, which is ultimately what the users care about. I mean, you see evidence of that today when you look towards these cloud-enabled applications where you take away the desktop entirely and you make the application available through some cloud service, some software as a service, for example. And so I think it's that refocusing. It's when we in IT focus on the applications themselves and maybe less on the desktops, which is what we're seeing here, I think is when we're now beginning to do a much better job of delivering those applications to their users.
Now, toward the end of last year, VMware kind of realigned their certification programs into what's essentially now a four-pillar approach.
Correct.
With, I guess, 3 or 4 expertise levels. Any thoughts on that? If I'm working in a shop, is there a particular one of those pillars I should be looking at as a way to differentiate myself as a professional?
Well, Don, that's kind of a loaded question, I think, because there are the 4 different pillars that are out there, and then there's also the tiers to each. So you start out with the VCA, and you go to the VCP, and you go to, I think it's the VCIX now, and then all the way up to the top level certifications. And even VMware has not even filled out, I'm not even sure at this point, they filled out the entire depth of all the certifications just yet. Now, I say that's kind of a loaded question because everybody kind of tends to focus then on the VCP, the DCV part of the VCP, kind of your classic VCP out there. But there are other ones out there that if you're just looking for a VCP, might honestly be a little easier than just the DCV content itself. There's the DTM content, which has to do with VMware Horizon and VMware View. There's also the one for their networking technologies as well, the VCP NV. And so there are other alternatives out there that needn't necessarily be your second VCP. It could be the one they aim for first. I think the reality, though, is that in terms of the program itself, so notwithstanding how they've actually structured this generation of the program, unfortunately, with the rollout of this current generation, so this whole V6 version of the VCP, VMware kind of has dropped the ball, I think, in a couple of ways as it relates to how the information has gotten disseminated out to people. For example, the beta period for the VCP6, specifically the DCV, I can't speak to the other ones, but the beta period, for example, for VCP6 DCV, I think was something like 10 or 11 months long, which is really one of the longest beta periods I've ever experienced. And even we here at Pluralsight kind of struggled with trying to figure out exactly when and where we should start building this content because the beta period went on for so long. Subsequent to that, when we finally came out of the beta period, it took VMware even still a period of time for them to adjust, for them to update their objectives and tasks associated with that beta period. So a lot of people kind of got hamstrung because they were working to a certain set of objectives and tasks. And you and I both know that when you go from beta to the regular release of an exam, there are going to be some changes. But if you go from beta to the regular production release, and then later on quietly again adjust some of the objectives and tasks, that almost borders on unfair for the learner.
Now, you're currently not working on VMware training for Pluralsight. You're currently producing a series of courses for Citrix, which is another area that you're kind of well known for. Kind of give me the technical leader compare and contrast. Where is the Citrix world these days, kind of in relation to the VMware world, or maybe even the Microsoft world?
It's hard to say in contrast with the other two because Citrix does very different things than the other two do. One of the neat parts about Citrix is that in recent years, so in fact, let me step back a second. Citrix has had a problem for a lot of years of this unrelated diversification into products that strayed pretty far away from their core value proposition. So when you think of a Citrix, most people commonly think of the product that we think of as Zen App or Zen Desktop, which used to be Presentation Server, which used to be Metaframe, and so on and so on. And so people think of Citrix as that product. And over the years, they have done they did an okay job of assimilating other products into that portfolio. in some cases in support of the flagship product, like NetScaler, for example, which is a perfect adjunct product in support of a XenApp, Zen desktop environment. But where Citrix actually started to get a little strange with things was in this unrelated diversification into products that were wildly out of scope with the things that they're most well known for. Now, very recently, there's been some activist investor work going on there inside of the board of directors for Citrix that has essentially kind of given them the ultimatum that they need to shed some of this excess weight in order to support that core product line, in order to maximize their profitability. Now, I know we're kind of getting into what you would read the Wall Street Journal here, but to us technicians, to we in IT, the result of all that work and the backroom dealings and whatever's going on inside the board of directors, the result of that is going to create, at least in my opinion, is going to create a stronger Citrix with a greater focus on that product line that we're most familiar with some of the elimination of during this intervening period. We've had some real problems with quality, code quality coming out of Citrix. They've had a renewed, very strong focus there on code quality coming out over the last couple of years. And so whereas we've seen kind of a strange Citrix for a couple of years, I think what we're going to end up with from this moment forward is a very strong company that is producing a very strong product.
Do you think VMware's recent moves have kind of also been to trim down and refocus, maybe not on the core product, but on the core audience? I mean, their stronghold has always been the large enterprise with tons and tons of virtual machines running around. Do you think maybe they're just kind of pulling back and both focusing on that core product as well as things like vCenter Orchestrator that wrap around and provide the management around that core product?
It's very possibly, but honestly, acquisitions, mergers are a very complex thing. They're a very difficult thing to try to pin any kind of ongoing strategy around, because as a function of a merger, anytime you're dealing with a Dell spending a 9-figure sum to purchase another company, there are also some decisions that have to be made for reasons that are altogether different from what you just discussed. There are certain products there in the VMware portfolio that may get spun off for no other reason than just to acquire enough capital to complete the merger. So it's hard to answer that question right now today because of all the silliness that goes on as part of this merger. I think as we get to the other end of it, the real tell will happen when we learn more about, after this is complete, what the VMware of the near-term future is going to look like. Right now, everything is still very, to use a term, cloudy.
Now, when you think of VMware and you think of the core vSphere product, and you think about who their competition is, the obvious classic competition has been Microsoft and their Hyper-V hypervisor. And for a long time, it was very clear that Hyper-V was not a mature product. VMware had a huge head start, a huge lead in the technology and the feature set and everything else. And they certainly played that really well and got into a lot of companies and got very embedded and did a good job. It definitely seems like in the last couple of releases of Hyper-V, Microsoft has caught up and perhaps in some areas surpassed. What's your take right now? I mean, knowing what you do about what's probably coming in the next release of Windows Server, knowing where we are right now with vSphere 6, if I'm an organization that's maybe coming to a point where I have to make a decision to go one way or the other, or maybe our maintenance agreements are at a point where maybe we can make a decision to switch if it seems like the right thing to do. Where's the two kind of sit in terms of parity with each other?
Well, I'll answer your question by way of metaphor. There was a period not long ago when you had a lot of organizations that were considering expanding their use of SAN storage, for example. And at the time, and really is still today, there were kind of two different approaches you would go down. You would go down one path that involved the use of fiber channel cables, and you'd go down another path that involved the use of network cables with iSCSI. And there was really no correct answer because for your more or less everyday average workloads, both of them were storage and could, if you configured them correctly, provide whatever the storage or meet whatever storage requirements you had. And so the rule was, or the rule of thumb was that if you've been going down the path of fiber channel, we'll just keep going down that path. And if you've been going down the path of iSCSI, keep going down that path because you already have the sunk cost, the investment in whatever stuff you have. And right now today, when you're thinking about these two different hypervisors, you have two different schools of thought, right? If you walk into two different kinds of restaurants, you're going to get a different vibe from restaurant A than you are from restaurant B. At the end of the day, you're going to get a meal. right? At the end of the day, you're going to get virtual machines and the abilities to run workloads, but you kind of have to think about what you've invested in. So where are your investments now today? And also, which of the two menus do you prefer? Do you like the way that this works? Do you like the way that this works? Because the two approach the problem in very different ways. Now, I know that's your standard consultant answer, which is it depends. The reality is that and we'll know more here as we get further on into this year. When VMware comes with its VMworld, or with its new VMworld conference coming up later in the summer, early fall, that's really where I think we're going to find out what they've been focusing on. So where their interests have lied over the last 12 months. I think right now today we have a better feel in the Microsoft space about where their interests lie. Microsoft's been quite a bit more public about what's coming as it relates to the next generation of Windows Server than what we're seeing out of a VMware, for example. So just in terms of where should you go today, you might just kind of hold off for a second, because coming up this summer and in this early fall, we have both of these companies that may or may not, at least in the case of Microsoft we know, but we're not really entirely sure with VMware, may or may not have some pretty big advances to take a look at. And if they do align with what's interesting to you, then that's the approach you should go down.
Now, in last month's show, we had Jason Helmick catch you at Tech Mentor, and he asked you what you thought people should kind of be focusing their technology education on for the next 6 months, year, however long. So I'm not going to ask you that again. Instead, I want to ask you the other big question that people are always asking me, and I know they're always asking you too. Once you decide what it is you want to focus on, how do you do it? How do you keep up? What are some of the resources you use to figure out what's going on in the industry, where you should point your eyes? And then once you kind of get a feel for that, how do you personally train yourself up?
I'll tell you a little personal secret that there are certain instances with these courses that I'm filming where I'm learning it at about the same pace I think I'm teaching it sometimes, because the way technology moves, that the pace of it, you kind of have to learn by doing. And so fully admittedly, there are the occasional situation where I say to myself, oh, wow, that's actually pretty cool. That's how that works. And I say that, I guess I admit that for the very obvious reason that the only way you can really figure this stuff out is to actually do it. I find all too often, when you and I when we're around at the different conferences, when we're talking to people out in the field, where you have people that may not necessarily have their own capacity for building these environments, their own capacity for even kind of tooling around in a world that's very safe for them. And the very best thing I think a person can do today is to go find themselves a sufficiently powerful machine. Go buy yourself a really powerful desktop with lots of RAM and get yourself a copy of whatever your favorite Type 2 hypervisor is. Mine is VMware Workstation, just because I happen to like it. And use that as your platform for building a bunch of VMs and connecting them together, and just see what this stuff looks like by playing around with it. You can read articles, you can read blog posts, you can read the daily news that goes on from the different magazine outlets that are out there, but there really is just no substitute for sitting down in front of a technology and really just kind of pounding through it, so that you can figure out exactly what's coming up, and you can see the problems that you experience in trying to put these things together. That's really just the very best way to learn a new technology, and honestly, it's the way that I go through learning the technology myself.
So since I know you have a couple of those desktop machines that you play with, what's the specs on that machine, and what should someone expect to be paying for one of those these days?
Surprisingly little, actually. One of the problems I see a lot of people do is they are used to working with servers that exist in a data center. And so a lot of the IT guys I talk to go out and they spend really too much money trying to get server class equipment in order to support this environment that they intend to build at home. The reality is that if you are a bit of and I'll admit I'm a bit of a home builder myself, I always have been since the beginning. If you're a bit of a home builder, there are some of your non-standard websites out there, usually factored for video games, honestly, that can help you create some very powerful equipment for doing exactly like what I'm talking about here. There's a couple of websites out there. I can name off a couple of the ones I've used in the past. This is not an endorsement by any means, but these are just the ones I've used. There's a website out there called cyberpowerpc.com. That's a great little location for assembling a PC out of individual parts that you would not be able to purchase if you went to a Best Buy or a Dell or online someplace else. There's another place called npcnoise.com that's got a great set of machines if you're looking for absolutely silent computers. Notwithstanding which location you go to, if you go through and build yourself a machine out of whole cloth and put all the pieces together, number one, it's kind of fun, actually. It's quite fun to actually put these things together. But number two, it allows you to create a desktop type machine with the kinds of server type performance and horsepower that you would otherwise have to have a screamingly loud piece of server hardware sitting in your home office somewhere.
Yeah, I had one of those. I think it cost about $30 a month just in electricity to run it.
Oh yeah, the power drain on those things is just ridiculous. Now, a desktop machine also is designed to be a consumer level device, and so they're designed to be low power utilization anyway. To your specific question, so the machine that I use is it's a home built machine. It's got, I believe it's got 6 logical processors in it. I forget if that's 3 and 2 or 2 and 3. 64 gigs of RAM. I've got a terabyte of SSD.
And that's a big deal.
And that's a big deal. Yeah, having SSD, anytime you're running virtual machines, they have to be on SSD. It really doesn't matter what kind of consumer grade SSD you have it on. Just as long as you have it on SSD that's consumer grade SSD, you'll be fine. If you try to plug it into the port that's the 6 megabit per second or gigabit per second, the eSATA, the SATA connection there in the back, you tend to get even greater performance there. You don't necessarily get better performance by RAID zeroing your SSD, although some arguments are out there that you will. I have not experienced it myself. But honestly, having a desktop machine with plenty of RAM, with virtualization, you always end up RAM bound first in terms of creating multiple simultaneously running machines. Having plenty of RAM, having plenty of SSD, and honestly, a reasonable amount of CPU horsepower. You tend not to be bound by CPU when you're doing this. Install a copy of Windows 10 on it, install a copy of VMware Workstation on it, and use that as your source, your platform for building virtual machines. When I'm building these courses here for Pluralsight, like the vSphere course that the whole learning path we just finished, all 26 hours of it, there were, 8 or 9 virtual machines running simultaneously with 2 or 3 more VMs inside those VMs running, and everything worked just fine inside of that 64 gigs of RAM. So you needn't necessarily get kind of overawed with some of the Microsoft minimum or whatever your vendor name is, minimum recommendations for processing power, for horsepower, for your applications. Just set everything up with as minimum a configuration as possible so that you can get more VMs running and create a more complex environment.
Cool. Sounds like good advice. Well, Greg, I don't want to keep you because I know you've got courses to film. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the feedback. And we'll look forward to whatever comes out of you next.
Thank you.
And now it's my turn. This month, I want to talk about 2 of the most hated words in all of IT. Mission critical. Yeah, you hear it all the time. Email is mission critical. File servers are mission critical. Everything is mission critical, right? No. You know what's mission critical? Oxygen. Without oxygen, you die. And so oxygen is mission critical. Yeah, not having email is inconvenient, but a lack of email is unlikely to cause death or major brain damage. It's not even likely to cause any significant loss of money. It's just annoying. But here's the fallout of labeling everything as mission critical. Fear. When an IT team is told that nothing can ever fail, ever, then they're basically just being put into a culture of continuous fear. Because, of course, something is going to fail at some point. Only everything is mission critical. And so everything IT does starts to get viewed through this lens of, could this possibly fail? And you know the best way to avoid failure? Change nothing. Ever. A lot of companies adopt change management frameworks like ITIL. And I like to joke that because ITIL was originally created by a portion of the UK government, that it's like asking the DMV how you should run IT. I also like to joke a bit that ITIL's approach to change is to basically halt all molecular motion, to only allow change after it's been, to paraphrase Douglas Adams, sent in, sent back, lost, found, subjected to public inquiry, and then buried for 3 months in soft peat and recycled as a firelighter. It's a good joke at a conference, but it actually hits a little too close to home because while ITIL wasn't necessarily meant to stop change, that's how a lot of companies use it. Because change creates the possibility of failure. And because failure will not be tolerated, because everything is mission critical, calling everything mission critical is basically telling IT that they need to be on high alert at all times, every day. But human beings can't do that. Businesses complain because IT takes too long on projects and because we're not agile and we're not flexible and we always say no, but that's because we're simply terrified of failure. When you tell us that everything is mission critical, the safest response is to lock it down and prevent change as much as possible. Business leaders with unrealistic expectations are obviously partly to blame here, but so is IT. Our problem is that when something does fail, it takes us too long to recover, and so what could be a minor inconvenience, not having email for an hour or two, can too easily turn into a major problem, not having email for a week, and then finding out you lost everything in everyone's mailboxes. We started this perception back in the day when we really didn't have much of a choice. Recovery options were basically tape drives and rebuilding servers from scratch, like actual physical servers. Fortunes were made creating faster recovery solutions, real-time recovery solutions, and so on, but too many of us in IT haven't moved on from those days. Maybe we're not using tapes now, but recovery still takes too long. And that's because we still configure servers manually. We treat them as special, unique pets, and when they die, we have to have a funeral, build a crypt, and then go shopping for a new pet. Too many companies are still fighting the more automated DevOps-style approach to infrastructure management, where servers are cattle, not pets. They're not unique. If one gets sick, you kill it and make another. Think about it this way. If you have a monitoring solution detect that the email server isn't performing well and might be about to crash, then that same solution can kick off a runbook that spins up a new server and deletes the old one. And your downtime might be between 0 seconds and a few minutes. No manual effort, and most importantly, a consistent result. Suddenly, failure is an option because it's an inconvenience, not a week-long catastrophe. Saying that everything is mission critical is dumb. Saying that a certain amount of downtime is tolerable, well, that's smart. Building an infrastructure that can hold the line on that downtime, that's forward-looking. But we need to eliminate this culture of fear and this blanket intolerance of failure because it's unrealistic in a physical universe, and it's unfair to both IT and the business. Not everything is mission critical. And that's our show for this month. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you'll check back next month for more of Pluralsight's IT Ops News and Talk. Until then, I'm Don Jones.